If you had 60 seconds to explain the Florida's water crisis, how would you do it?
I would tell you that 100 years ago, people made decisions that they thought were good decisions. And in the process, they drained the Everglades. They threw off the imbalance of an ecosystem from Lake Okeechobee to the Florida Keys and on both sides of the coast. And that imbalance has put the jeopardy in the future of National Park, one of the most iconic fisheries on the planet, in peril. And if today we've learned something from the past, it is that those intentions that were made, those decisions that were made with good intentions can have negative consequences. The good news is there's a plan to fix it, to put those pieces back together and reconnect that system. That plan is Everglades restoration, the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan, which is also the largest ecosystem restoration project ever undertaken in the history of the world.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Tom Rowland Podcast, brought to you by Starbright. Today is one of our episodes of the Anglers Unite series, brought to you by Burnowin. Burnowin is a company that makes quick switch marine accessories for your boat, and they make absolutely fantastic mounts on the boat that you can put fillet tables, different rod holders, knives, anything you want, downriggers on these mounts in your boat. If you don't know about Burnowin, you should definitely check it out. One of the things about Burnowin is that they're very concerned and interested in how we as anglers can make a difference in preserving places, making sure that we have the rights to go fish in different places, making sure that the habitat and water are healthy. We got together to do this series called Anglers Unite, and one of the very first subjects that I thought of was, I know of no other example of how anglers can unite, me being one of these people who have united around something and actually made a difference. I could think of no better example than Captains for Clean Water. Captains for Clean Water is an organization in Florida that focuses on Everglades restoration. It was started by Captain Daniel Andrews, which we've had on the show a number of times, and Captain Chris Whitman, who will be joining us today. They are both fishing guides. They made their living as fishing guides. It was their dream job. It was exactly what they wanted to do. And they were forced to make a decision to not do that job anymore and focus on spearheading this mission, creating a movement around this mission so that other people could continue to do their dream job of being a fishing guide, so that other people could have their dream life of walking on a beach in Florida and not having dead fish all over the place, of, having a small hotel, all different types of things, where if the water quality is bad, none of those things exist. So I wanted to have Chris on the podcast today, and this is what we're going to do. This is a two-part series. On part one, we're going to revisit the history of Captains for Clean Water. If you're a longtime listener, then you've probably already heard the history of Captains for Clean Water, but I will tell you that Chris went into a number of stories that I had not heard before, and goes back through the history, why they started this, what were the factors that made them realize that this isn't an option, this is actually survival, how important this was. And in part one, we're going to go over all of those different things. And in part two, we are going to talk about the status of where we are today and what the future looks like. And I encourage you, if you don't know about Captains for Clean Water, and I encourage you to do this with any organization that is asking for your support, check them out. Go to captainsforcleanwater.org and you can check out, read all of the different bios, and you can see what they're up to. Ask other people what they think about this organization. Do your research. Do your research on any other organization that is asking for your support. I would strongly encourage that, because as you will learn in some of these different conversations that we had here, is that not everybody is what they claim to be. So be very careful in your support, because your support is incredibly powerful. Your voice is incredibly powerful, and we're going to learn exactly how powerful it is as I bring on my friend Captain Chris Whitman, who is one of the founders of Captains for Clean Water, in part 1 of this series. And please stick around for part 2. And if you enjoy either one of these, please share it with other of your fishing or angling friends or bird watching friends or somebody that likes to be outside by the water, because this is very, very powerful. And movements like this are not restricted to just anglers and boaters. This is anyone who likes the water. You like to walk on the beach? You like to be around the water? This is very, very important to you, as you will find out. Here we go with Captain Chris Whitman from Captains for Clean Water.
Hey everybody, I'm Captain Chris Whitman, co-founder of Captains for Clean Water, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
All right, Chris, how you doing, man?
Good, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to have you on the show. It's been a little while since we've talked. It's probably since your elk hunt.
Yeah. Likewise, happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm really happy to be here. This is part of the Anglers Unite series that we do on the podcast, and I can think of no other organization or movement where anglers have united to make a change and really move the needle in a positive direction. You guys have been the spearhead for that. So I'm really happy to have you on the show and doing this with you. So let's just start like this. If you got 60 seconds to explain the Florida water problems to somebody that has no idea what they are, never been to Florida, how do you do it?
I would say, one, Florida has a myriad of water problems, like many states. But with Captains for Clean Water, our focus is specifically Everglades restoration. And the reason that's needed and the reason that's our focus, you'd have to go back a century when Florida was looked at as a worthless swamp, and they were looking at how do we develop. And so there was an effort to drain the Everglades, and that effort was successful. And what it ultimately did was cut off flow of water through the middle of the state to Lake Okeechobee, ultimately down through the Everglades to Florida Bay. And it connected the lake artificially to the east and west coast and cut off that flow of water to the Everglades. In doing so, it started to throw off the massive imbalance in that ecosystem. The Everglades started to become too dry, Florida Bay started to become too salty, and the coasts that were now receiving the water that naturally went to the Everglades were being decimated with too much fresh water, and after decades of pollution, too much polluted fresh water.
Wow, that's pretty good. You've obviously had a lot of practice, with that. But it is very complicated thing for someone that is just watching from afar. That there's problems on the east, there's problems on the west, and there's problems in the south, and how do those all connect? And you did a really good job of doing that. But for somebody that is from Montana, California, Texas, Tennessee, up the East Coast somewhere, why should they care about what's going on in Florida and what you're doing about it?
One, because it's the right thing to do. But two, we're talking about, if you're an angler, especially as Anglers Unite, if you're an angler, the Everglades and the Florida Keys are either one of the places that you love to go all the time, or they're certainly on your bucket list. It is the birthplace of saltwater fly fishing. It's one of the most iconic places that you can go chase tarpon and snook and permit and bonefish. And so in addition to that, even if you're not an angler, it's a national park. The Everglades is one of the most amazing ecosystems on the planet. And just saving those aspects, this isn't just a Florida problem. This is something that no different than if something was threatening or happening to Yellowstone. Mm-hmm. No different than when the fights were going on with the Pebble Mine in Alaska. those are such valuable and important places to us as Americans and us as anglers that their fate depends on not just their location, whether it's in Florida or whether it's all the way at the opposite side of the continent in Alaska. But the fate and the future depend on the engagement and involvement from everyone in between, everyone across the country. And the Everglades and Everglades restoration is the largest ecosystem restoration project in the history of the world. And it is a 50-50 partnership between the state of Florida and the United States government. And so it has to get federal funding every year over the course. And so you need support for funding Everglades restoration projects from the other 49 states. And that's a big part of it is, hey, we should be spending this money, investing in a national park, investing in saving the Everglades. And you need that support from the other 49 states. And it's really important that the constituency within those states is vocal and puts pressure on their congressional members to continue to fund Everglades restoration.
It's interesting, the Pebble Mine. Do you think, did we learn any lessons from that whole situation?
I think that probably goes two directions. The lessons that were learned with the Pebble Mine from Everglades was it'd be a lot smarter and a lot easier to stop the impact and destruction of an area than it is to 100 years later go back and try to fix it, which is the scenario that we're in with the Everglades. So that was a case that could be made against why we shouldn't be mining and the impacts that would happen and could happen to Bristol Bay if that mining took place. The other thing I think that we learned is the importance and the power of the angling community being united, being engaged, and being educated, and that we all are connected by the water and by the pursuits on those waters, regardless if we've ever set foot in Bristol Bay or in the Everglades or the Snake River or wherever your favorite haunts might be. We're all connected by that at some level, and together those voices are the critical component to driving either progress on restoration or stopping bad policy or any of those things. So what we learned was a collective voice across the country is in fact the most powerful mechanism that must exist in order to drive progress in any of these issues.
Yeah. Well, that was a nice success there. But let's turn back the clock a little bit to when Captains for Clean Water started. And can you walk back to like what you and Daniel were doing at the time and when you knew that it was time that you needed to take action on a level that was much different than you had before?
Well, Daniel and I had much cooler offices at that time.
And those offices were a skiff?
They were, a 17-foot skiff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's super important for people to know about your organization, that you and Daniel were front lines fishing guides, fishing every day. That's how you were making your living, right?
Yeah.
So let's just walk back to that.
Yeah, we were fishing guides. That was our dream job. We're both born and raised here in Southwest Florida, fished all over the country, but guiding here and building those experiences for people, that was our career, and it was the best job that you could possibly have, as anybody out there who's been a fishing guide knows. And throughout our career, and throughout really even before becoming fishing guides, but throughout our careers, especially, we saw the decline in our fisheries. We saw places that were some of the best fishing when we were kids, that by the time we were guiding, you didn't even think about going there because the habitat that was lost and the productivity of that area. And for the first 16 years of my career, despite all those things and impacts, and seeing the impacts of discharges from Lake Okeechobee to the coast, dealing with red tide blooms. I wasn't involved. Neither one of us were involved at all in trying to change the trajectory of that. And we were aware there was an issue, but in our minds, this was a massive issue that, what could I do? I'm just a fishing guide. And we didn't see a path to what we could do. So we just chose to adapt and run farther away from it and deal with the situation. And it wasn't until 2016 that everything boiled up to a point that was kind of that catalyst that we had to step back and say something better change, something has to change, or else, the future of not only our careers, but our entire way of life is in jeopardy. And so we were having massive discharges from Lake Okeechobee right at the start of our tourist season. It first week of January, and we were already catching tarpon, and we were ready to roll into what we thought was going to be an incredible season. And a few weeks later, we've got massive discharges that basically shut down the fishery. And so we couldn't in good conscience take, money from clients to go out and provide a subpar experience. Many of them, we had red tide. Many of them, their families didn't want to stay and sit on the beach with red tide everywhere. And so people started leaving. Hotels were getting, vacancies during when they should be completely booked out. Restaurants were empty. And so we had time on our hands, and we started talking about what could be done, what needs to be done. And in that process, we started calling scientists. We started just talking to everybody from a scientist to a bartender. And we realized a couple of things. One was that this isn't a science problem. There's a solution that was in place at that time for 16 years. It's the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, and it was voted into law in a bipartisan effort between Governor Jeb Bush and President Bill Clinton the year that I started guiding. And here we were 16 years later, halfway through what was supposed to be the timeline for the suite of restoration projects, and 68 projects in that massive massive restoration project list. And at the time, not a single one had been completed. And what we realized was it wasn't a science issue. Science had determined this is why this is happening. We changed the hydrology of Florida, and it's thrown off the entire balance of this massive ecosystem. It wasn't an engineering problem. The biggest engineering firm in the world, the Army Corps of Engineers, had developed a plan to reconnect that system, remove barriers to flow, fill in canals that were draining areas, reconnect the timing and delivery of that water back to the Everglades. And in doing so, stop those damaging discharges to our home. And so it wasn't an engineering problem. It wasn't a science problem. Things had slowed and stagnated because it was a lack of political will. And the reason a lack of political will was able to exist was there was a lack of public pressure. People like myself, born and raised on an island at the mouth of the river that those discharges come down, who are fishing guide by profession, if I'm not vocal and involved, who the hell will be, And so that's what we figured out, was that the real problem here was special interests had been able to dictate, and I shouldn't say dictate, had been able to influence water management policies and progress on Everglades restoration, because the broad stakeholder base of Floridians or tourists who come here, or anglers who want to come here and fish or love to come here and fish, business owners were absent, and their voices were absent. And so there was this void. There was the science that said, here's a problem. There's the engineering that said, here's how we can fix it. and this void that existed was the public, all of us. And so that's really when we figured out, if we thought that if everyone knew about this problem, it would have been fixed a long time ago, and it wouldn't have been allowed to slow. And policymakers would have to be held accountable, and they would have to fund these projects, and they would have moved at an expeditious pace instead of what was happening, which was the total opposite. And so we thought, hey, if we could build a mechanism to reach people like ourselves, we can't expect them to engage in an issue if they don't understand it and don't know about it. So if we could reach them and educate them on the problem and on the solution to that problem, and educate them on why their voice is needed and is actually the critical missing link to driving change, that if we could do that, and then we could provide the machine for them to make their voice heard to policymakers that need to hear it, that would be the missing link that would ultimately drive change. And so that's when Captains was born, was to ultimately take the voice of the people, educate them, take their voice, empower them to use their voice, and then give them a massive megaphone through which to use that voice. And in doing so, create overwhelming public pressure that would ultimately drive political will.
Wow. So when you start that, it's just you and Daniel just kind of hatching this idea. What's the next step? Like what's the step that makes it an official kind of thing where you actually decide, well, I mean, it was being decided for you. It sounds like that you couldn't fish, right? So like what else are you going to do? But what is that moment where you kind of decide, okay, well, this is what we're doing and this is the next step?
Yeah, great question. And we had no idea what we were doing.
Sometimes being naive is excellent, because you're like, oh yeah, it shouldn't be that hard, right? Like we'll just create a little organization.
No, you're absolutely right. Being naive and being angry is a deadly combination.
That's right.
It's funny. I remember Daniel and I, we're born and raised here, so everyone in the community. And our first thing was we called the mayor. Like the mayor of Fort Myers is going to fish, but we called the mayor. We held a press conference and we made him stand there next to us, and we need to fix this. We need to send this water south. And but really, as we started diving into it, the sadness of seeing a place you love crumble and die turned into frustration, turned into anger, after we started going to people and policymakers who, this is on their shoulders. And instead of being welcomed with, how can we help? We were met with, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And for us, we're fishing guides that are born and raised on this water. We are guides because we are in tuned to the most subtle changes and things that are happening in that ecosystem. And you're sitting up here in an office in Tallahassee with some charts and a briefing binder. You've never set foot on our fishery, and you're going to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about? Like it ticked us off. And so it happened rather quickly, but it wasn't at first like, hey, let's start an organization. It was like, let's just get the word out about what's happening. We did that by just, what you did then. Let's start a Facebook page. Yeah. We're captains, and what we want is clean water. And so we started this Facebook page. And the interesting thing about it was there was so many individuals like us that were frustrated, that were sad, that were angry, that were their businesses were being impacted, or they're just their way of life, or the place they went for solitude, or peace, whatever was being impacted. That fishing guides saying, hey, look what's happening. It just blew up, and this organic movement started, and our Facebook page exploded. And next thing you know, news outlets are reaching out. And we very quickly realized, one, that this was something that the public was widely aware that something needed to change, but they were many of them in the same position as we were. It's like, how can we even do anything? What even needs to be done? And so it kind of went to, okay, there's all this energy, there's all this movement, there's all these people and attention, but this is something that's going to have to sustain. We've got to keep this energy. We've got to organize and direct that energy, and it has to last not for a year or 2 years, but likely for decades to see Everglades restoration through to completion. And so that's where the organization part of it came in. Was we've got a movement that is just born out of catastrophe, out of collapse, and we have to organize that in order for it not to just be a blip on the radar and then go away, when the red tide goes away or whatnot. And so that's what we did. We reached out to friends locally that we have no idea what a nonprofit C3, C4, C whatever is. But we reached out to people who do know and said, here's what we want to do. And they helped us set it up to become official, to make sure we are accountable, make sure we are accurate. And then very quickly it went from, hey, let's try to make a difference while running charters, to this is such a massive problem and such an opportunity to really change the history of what's happening with our fisheries, that it's not something that it's going to require every bit of our effort. It's going to require not just every bit of time during the day, but literally dedicating probably the rest of our lives to it.
Right.
So it was a pretty heavy decision to walk away from your dream job, and in order to save the foundation of where your dream job was built on,
Yeah.
But that's it. I'd say that first year and a half is what it was, where we were still guiding, but then, the work and the opportunities with moving the needle on Everglades restoration became so great that it started to shift our time away from the water. And
Sure.
as you know, what makes a great fishing guide is one that is out there every day, dialed in on the patterns of those fish, what they're doing, what's changing. So you start to go where you're shifting, where you're not on the water for 2 weeks, and it gets to where the type of guiding that Daniel and I had, built our careers on, we weren't able to provide that anymore. And so then it just was, okay, we're not going to dip our toes into this. We're either going to dive in head first.
Well, it's probably the other way too. Like if you're going to Tallahassee and you're talking to lawmakers and you're doing all of these things, writing letters and doing all of these things on a daily basis, and then you take 2 weeks off and you go fishing for a little while and you get back to that, a lot's probably changed there too. It doesn't sound like either one of those are well, I know for a fact that fishing guides and being a tournament fisherman and all that, that's not something that you dip your toe in. Like,
no, you're absolutely right. It goes both ways. And really, I think that's probably just life. Like if you're going to do anything to its highest level of impact, it's going to require 100% of your dedication and attention.
So when you're first starting that and you're getting to this point where you had to have some kind of successes to realize, wow, we've made a difference here. And if we really focus on this, we feel like we can make a really big difference. Do you remember like the first success? I mean, you mentioned that your Facebook page took off, but that's like all just energy and movement and anger and frustration and all of that. But where was the first time that you actually saw that you made a difference? The organization.
Very beginning, it was losses, I guess, or just being met with like your voice, you're an annoyance. Your voice doesn't matter. The real first time that we saw that we could, this model, our philosophy was right, that if people got involved and used their voices, that was the missing link. The first time that happened was 2017, so about a year into Captains for Clean Water. We had one of the most critical project within the 68 projects of Everglades restoration. It's kind of like the heart of Everglades restoration, or the cornerstone project, is the EAA reservoir. It's a massive reservoir that is intended to take water from Lake Okeechobee during the wet season, instead of discharging it out to the two coasts. Take that water into this reservoir. It's larger than the island of Manhattan. Okay, it's 16,500 acres is the actual footprint of that project right now. But it would take that water in, and then it would deliver that water to the Everglades during the dry season when it was needed. That project was the most politically challenging of all the Everglades restoration projects. And when we would go and meet with policymakers and agency folks, they would tell us straight up, like, that project's never going to happen. It's too politically challenging. It's not going to happen. And so 2017, we had Senate President Joe Negron, who was terming out. He wasn't seeking further public office. And he, on his way out, made his legacy. He filed Senate Bill 10, which was to fund and build the EAA reservoir. And the reason that happened was from that 2016, 15, 16 collapse event, all that energy, all the people and the public pressure and the news articles that boiled up to Tallahassee. We hosted a sport fishing day where we brought in outdoor brands and fishermen and companies and businesses, all flooded the Capitol lawn and set up tents and pulled boats up there. And we made a huge sport fishing day at the Capitol, and then went in and met with those policymakers to say, hey, this is about more than snook and tarpon or seagrass and dolphins and sea turtles. We're not here, protesting with glitter signs and bullhorns. We're here as business owners and industry leaders from not just Florida, but across the country, saying that this ecological problem is having a significant economic impact. And we were able to take and connect a problem that was, to us, mattered because what it was doing to our fisheries, and put it into a language that policymakers could quantify the need to invest billions of dollars because of the impact it was having economically and what it was doing to our communities, not just in the fishing space, but those people were kind of the canaries in the coal mine. Right. And so it's real hard to dispute what, a couple hundred fishing guides and a bunch of brands in the outdoor industry are saying. This is what is happening. We're seeing it with our own eyes. And so that was really the catalyst moment that put Everglades restoration on a fast track. And from that 2017, when that bill was filed and then ultimately passed, that was the first win that was like, yep, we were right. If people understand there's an issue and understand their voice is needed and then are provided a mechanism to use that voice, we can drive change, something that we were told a year earlier that would never happen.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I love that. And it was super exciting to watch that all happen. And there was so much, like what you said, energy. Like there was so much energy at that point. And then what do you think have been the biggest losses? Like that's great to have a great big win like that, and it sets your organization up for growth and for being able to have a long-standing, sustaining presence in this fight. But there's obviously been losses too. What have been the biggest losses?
Yeah, one, we've been fortunate to have this momentum and be able to harness it and kind of build it over the last 9 years. And so I feel like the real big losses for Everglades restoration were in the first 16 years. And in the very beginning, since we've had a lot of victories that, you would have never thought would have happened. But, one of them was around that EAA reservoir where the original, so the way it works is the engineers determine this is how much water, volume of water, this project must store and convey annually. And so the original project called for a 60,000 acre reservoir that was shallow. 60,000 acres, maybe, 5-10 foot deep. And so massive footprint and shallow. And one of the benefits of that design is, one, the hydraulic pressure that the retainment walls have to hold back is nowhere near as high as a deep water reservoir. But also, a shallow water reservoir, you can grow aquatic, subaquatic, and aquatic emergent and submergent plants. And that's how they take up nutrients and clean the water. That's how engineered wetlands work. You have all these different plants from hydrilla to cattails. So the reservoir itself could be a massive cleaning filter, engineered wetland. What happened was, and this reservoir has to be located south of Lake Okeechobee for the obvious movement of water between the lake and the Everglades. What happened was they were seeking out willing sellers in the EAA, specifically the sugar industry, which had been the sole industry that had really been trying to maintain the status quo. And what happened was they needed willing sellers to come forward to take sugar land out of production at the bottom of that system in order to build this 60,000 acre reservoir. And the sugar industry came back and said, we are not interested. There are no willing sellers. We will not take any land out of production. And so the state was forced to go back and look at it and go, okay, well, we've got 16,500 acres of state-owned land in that area that they're growing sugar on. And those leases are going to expire. And so instead of building a 60,000 acre shallow reservoir to handle the required volume of water, we will build a 30 foot deep reservoir on 16,500 acres, which is actually about a 10,000 acre reservoir and then a 6,500 acre engineered wetland. But we'll build a deep water reservoir on a smaller footprint to move the same amount of water, but do it on a smaller amount of land. And so achieve the same goal with volume of water, but you don't get the same benefit in cleaning capacity out of that system. And so that was a pretty big loss that you've got the Senate president, one of the three most powerful people in Tallahassee at the time, saying we need to do this, and the influence or unwillingness of the sugar industry to come to the table and say, yeah, let's strike a deal to do what's good for Florida and for Everglades and everything. That didn't happen. So that was certainly frustrating at the time, and I'd say that was one of the most significant things. And then you fast forward that to today, where that reservoir is now under construction, and the water in that reservoir, the whole point of that project is to take water, store it, and have that water available to deliver to the Everglades in the dry season. And now the sugar industry is suing the Army Corps of Engineers over the operation of that project, saying that they should get priority on that water in that reservoir because it was once in Lake Okeechobee and it should be available to them for irrigation before it goes to the Everglades. So they're actually suing the Army Corps of Engineers over it, and that they lost at the district court level, and they appealed it. And so that decision is now sitting on the desk of a judge at the appellate court in Atlanta, and we're actually awaiting to hear a ruling on that probably any day. It's been a couple of years now that process has been going on, but so not only would they not come off land, but now that the taxpayers are building a $4 billion reservoir, now they want it to be private reservoir for them. So it's pretty frustrating, and not necessarily a loss, but one of the many constant hurdles, challenges,
Yeah. Now, another hurdle that we've encountered in the last few years are natural hurdles. Florida's been hit with a number of hurricanes. A lot of the people who have helped to move the needle, fishing guides in particular, were severely impacted in certain areas. And I know that captains, you guys did a great job of supporting the people who have supported you and rallying support for them through the brands, through raising money, through other things. I know that you were getting them back on the water and doing things to where they could get back on the water and earn money doing other things, maybe cleaning up. So let's talk about that real quick, about whether that temporarily changed the focus. Was it a setback? Did it help us move ahead in this fight in some way, shape, or form? But like those are kind of unexpected challenges that also very unfortunate challenges. But where do maybe hurricanes have other unintentional or unexpected kind of factors that go into this whole complicated system?
Yeah, no, great question. They do have other factors. And for us at Captains, like, we're not a relief organization.
Right.
We're not, we're not a rescue organization.
I know, but you became one
we did. And I guess it started a lot like Captain started. It's just kind of very organically without really thinking about it too much. I forget what the hurricane name of it was for some reason, but it hit Texas, in like Port Orange and Katy, Texas, areas that you and I fished tremendous amount during our redfish tournament careers. It hit this at the same time that Captains for Clean Water was like at a fishing tournament or something here in Fort Myers, that they had made the fishing tournament a benefit for the organization. And we're sitting here and as this storm is devastating our fishing family in Texas and Louisiana and Alabama and it was like, man, this just doesn't feel right for us to be sounding an alarm on a water issue thing here when people's lives are upended.
Right.
And so we decided, hey, let's turn this into a supply drive. And we just said, bring stuff to these fire departments, and those fire departments will get stuff to us, bring stuff to the tournament location. And next thing you know, man, the outpouring of support and love from the community for those people in Texas, we had, I think it was like almost 30,000 pounds of goods to bring out to those people. So Daniel and I dropped what we were doing. We rented the largest Penske truck that you're allowed to rent, and we filled it and another truck and trailer behind us. And after that tournament, we got in the truck and we drove straight through to Texas and delivered that stuff to a church, to people who were landlocked and couldn't get supplies. And so it was just something that we did. And then the funny thing about that was we went and we did this. We just drove, 19 hours straight, dropped all these goods off. We go and get on the road, and our wives are calling us saying, there's a hurricane coming. And now we have Irma bearing down on our own town. We just took all this stuff to Texas. So we stopped along the way back from Texas and collected goods to bring back to Fort Myers. And then we were crushed by Irma. But, what it boils down to is we have members and supporters from all walks of life, all over the country, all over the world, really. But at our core is fishing guides. That we were fishing guides. There's a special place in our heart for them. We believe that fishing guides are the most in touch with what's happening. They're the canaries in the coal mine, as I've said. And we feel a responsibility to support that community in a time of need. If they're not there, and the core of our organization slips away because they can't make it through these devastating natural disasters, then what long-term impact does that have on the fight to save the Everglades? And so we just feel a responsibility to that community. And when that happens, we're not a full-fledged, relief organization. So we can't make as big an impact as we would like to make, but we certainly pivot the focus of the organization during that time. We redirect staff. We try to make our staff resources help guides, whether that's in coordination of, hey, here's how you go through a FEMA process or an insurance process, or hey, here's brands that are donating clothes or goods, or like you said, are there needs we can hire those guides. And so, we would hire guides to go do debris cleanups, get first responders out, go take out, agency people, and just how can we get them on the water? Maybe not doing what they want to be doing, but they're still utilizing their expertise. Just, we're a proud community, fishing guides. We don't want a handout, even if we need it. And so it's important for us to be able to provide support to that community in a form of a way that they can give back as well. They're right. Just not. And so that's what we've done. And when we've done that, we've been very conscious that the people who give funding and support Everglades restoration efforts, that's what they give their money to. And those resources are held separate. And so when a hurricane hits, people reach out and say, hey, I want to give specifically to fishing guides, specifically to hurricane relief. So we set up a completely separate fund. We don't take any money out of that fund for overhead, for staff salaries or payroll. We even absorb the credit card processing fees. If people are donating with a credit card, we absorb those internally, to where every dollar that came in and comes into the organization for that guide relief, every single penny gets into the hand of fishing guides. And that's very, very important to us.
That's awesome. And especially that you are so aware that fishing guides don't necessarily at all want a handout. All they want to do is work. All they want to do is get back to doing what they were doing. And you allowed them to do that. And, after I was at that Captains for Clean Water event after Irma, and, went fishing with a guide. And then you guys paid for it. I was going to pay for it. And I did pay for it. I think you got paid double, because like you need this, right? And that's all they want. That's all anybody wants. It's a fishing guide, is just to get back on the water and recover and get back to work. That's great. So this has been a really great catch up. And what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this up here in just a minute after I ask you a couple more questions. Then we're going to go on to a part 2. So if you're listening to this was if you are unfamiliar with Captains for Clean Water and the history of Captains for Clean Water, this is intended to bring you up to speed on how we got to today. And then in the next section, we're going to go from where we're going in the future. So the last question on this series, or this portion of the show, is if you had done nothing, if we had done nothing, if the organization had done nothing, and many other groups had done nothing, where would Florida be today?
Oh, man. I honestly do not even want to think about that. It wouldn't be good. We've had our challenges. I mean, hurricanes alone, we've been through, since we started, we've been through a pandemic that shut down businesses and impacted families. We've been impacted directly by multiple hurricanes. Our headquarters here, our hometown, my island I grew up on, Sanibel Island, was direct hit, ground zero for Hurricane Ian. Our communities can sustain those blows on their own. They knock us down, but we're resilient. We get back up. We rebuild. What we cannot sustain is water crisis that shut down our economy, shut down our tourism, shut down our fishing, destroy our fisheries, and have impacts that last for decades after the water crisis is gone. We cannot sustain those on the heels of hurricanes and in between hurricanes and in between pandemics and anything else like that. And that would just completely change what South Florida is, why I live here, our way of life. Because if those businesses go away, if the fishermen go away, the commercial fishermen, the fishing guides, the small hotel owners, the small restaurant owners, if those go away, what they're replaced with is not what we are today. And then they're replaced with a baseline, a people with a baseline that is no idea of what Florida was. Mm-hmm. And are those people going to fight to save it and change it because they know where it came from? And so, man, if people hadn't gotten involved and changed the course of Everglades restoration over the past 10 years, I don't know. I could honestly say that I would probably second guess calling Florida home.
Yeah. Well, good thing. Good news.
Yeah.
We didn't do that.
Good news. That didn't happen.
Good news. So that's fantastic. And really, more than anything, it's been really cool to see a movement start, and to see it start out of something that I'm so familiar with about being a fishing guide. And you guys have done a great job, and it wasn't without personal sacrifice. And I want you to know that I understand that the personal sacrifice is coming, that you would really rather be out there pushing the boat around. I understand that. I don't know that a lot of people, I want to make sure that people do understand that that's where this came from. And it was very obvious and evident in the beginning, but I think that now it's gone on so long that people are like, oh, Daniel and Chris, I guess they're just like Washington guys. I don't know. Like, yeah. I mean, from if you're looking at it from New York or Minnesota or somewhere else, how do you know? And I think that's one of the most important things about your organization, and the leverage that you've been able to put on is where it came from. And so I'm happy to have brought that back. Not that people forgot, but I just think that there's a significant portion of people out there that didn't even realize that to begin with. And so that's great.
I appreciate that. It's funny too, because as a fishing guide, you'll get the most successful Fortune 500 CEO on your boat, and he's jealous of your lifestyle. Yep. And you can have a brain surgeon, an astronaut, I mean, you name it, and they're like, gosh, I cannot believe this is what you do. This is incredible. And so it's like, now to be kind of on the other side of that, to be like, God, man, what I would give to be, back on that skiff. But it's completely, because progress is happening, because it's effective, it's worth it. And I've got a 3-year-old little boy. Daniel has 2 little boys. So the reality is, I will never get that dream job back. But if we do, and we're successful, and we do what we need to do, maybe my son could pursue that dream job if that's what he chooses and that's what he wants. And so
your son and thousands of others.
That's right.
Right. And
that's right.
And those people are on the front lines. And I feel the same way about fishing guides and people that are just, I mean, it could just be an avid fisherman.
Totally.
Those are the people that know what's out there and care about it.
Yep.
And if those people go away and no one really knows what's out there and what the magic of the Everglades is, or the magic of any of these spots, then nobody really cares. And that's where, like what you're saying, is if it's all replaced by something else, that I don't necessarily think that anybody really cares deeply, like the people that are on the front lines today.
And that emotional, spiritual connection is the most important component. You protect what you love. If somebody is breaking into your house, you are going to fight to the death to protect your family. And so people must love the places in order for them to be willing to fight as hard as it is required for them to fight to protect them. And Fishing guides provide that connection. They provide the conduit for millions of people to experience these places, to then care about these places, and then to be provided the opportunity to plug in and help save them.
Yeah, and also, just like you mentioned, a lot of those people are very powerful, wealthy people that have spent, this is their outlet to maybe they spend the whole year doing something else and they spend 2 weeks fishing. This is the outlet. They have plenty of money, they have plenty of influence, and they're happy to put it towards this, but only because the fishing guide is the one that introduced them to it and educated them about it and creates this conduit, just like you said. So let's stop this one now, and we're going to go to a part 2 with Chris. So I hope that you'll come back for that, and that's where we're going to find out exactly what's going on right now and exactly where we're going. All right, so we'll see you on that.
Thank you, Tom.